Today, I'm so excited for you to meet my guest, Marissa Loewen. Let me introduce her to you before I bring her on. Marissa Loewen is a transformational business coach, community catalyst, and creative entrepreneur. Marissa's first foray into owning a business began at age 11 when Marissa wanted to sell cold milk and chocolate milk to classmates at lunchtime. With permission from Marissa's grade school, a janitor's closet was turned into a thriving food service business. With a corporate background in media, marketing, communications, online sales, and web design, Marissa created one of the first pop-up companies in North America focusing on made local and art sold in temporary retail shops, art galleries, and large-scale events, partnering with Etsy Canada. Marissa works with small business owners to create the rules in order to create thriving, resilient, prosperous businesses that fuel the business owner. In addition to a signature system for creating profit and ease in business, personal coaching, and an online digital profit planner, Marissa is also launching her first podcast called The Little Podcast of Big Questions. Hi, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. I just shared a little bit of information about your background, but if you can tell us a little bit about what got you here and how you've been using the experiences from your childhood. I mean, an entrepreneur at 11, that's amazing. So just share with us some of the struggles you've had mentally as far as your diagnosis, and then how that's brought you here today, and also a little bit about your podcast as well.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be able to speak about mental health and how it can affect people who are neurodivergent, and that includes, a variety of names: autism, ADHD, which I both have both, and I've diagnosed. But as an adult. So yeah, I did start my entrepreneurial journey at 11. I actually got my first job though in grade 5. I worked for the school. My job was to go and open up the school doors. And I also collected the recycling from each of the classrooms, and I did stapling. And I think I was like a child. I kind of stood out anyways. I had certain behaviors in classrooms that meant that the teachers would often send me to the library to read or do my own kind of work. I had some trouble with making social interactions. I was always socially awkward. I'm still socially awkward. I'm 42 and I'm still absolutely 100% socially awkward, and I own that. But yeah, and then once I had that job, I started thinking about, I really like making money. I like to have money. And my family wasn't exactly rich, and so it was really nice to have money to be able to buy things that I wanted or some extra things. So I also noticed we had this program that was called Hot Dog Day, and I think a lot of schools had it around North America, where you got to order hot dog or pizza, and it was delivered with a chocolate milk or a white milk or the orange drink, the famous orange drink that used to be around a lot in the 80s. And I thought, what if we had cold milk all the time? We got to have that. And so I approached my principal. Well, first we had milk delivery. I'm that old that we had delivery man. And I approached him and I said, can this be possible? Can I get milk delivered to the school? And he's like, yeah, I think this sounds like a really great idea. And then I talked to my principal, and he's like, this is a really interesting business idea. And I said, yeah, nobody wants warm milk in their lunch. So let's figure out how we can make this happen. And I saw that there was this a janitor door that had it opened up on the top half. And I thought, well, I can convert this old storage room into a cupboard. I just need a fridge. And then the principal said, well, we actually have a little mini fridge in our the teacher's lounge if you want to use that. And I said, okay. And next thing I know, I'm setting up milk programs for elementary schools, and it kept going. I started various concession stands throughout my junior high and high school for sport games in our school, and I just kind of kept going. And I went into the corporate world right after. I took a couple years of college, and I went into the corporate world, and then I decided to go back into school, and I ended up taking public relations, and I really loved it because it was behind the scenes. I could really help people form great communication and key messages. Even though wouldn't necessarily be the best communicator, I still had all these kind of little, blurbs. And I was saying that sometimes when I talk, I do this kind of popping noise when I talk, and I fidget and I look everywhere else. And so I might not necessarily be the best communicator for people, but I could help people be really good at communicating because I could study people. And what I didn't realize is that was, something with autism, is that we often will mask and mirror those around us. We know what's acceptable and how we can fit in. And that's a special skill that I have that I could help other people do too. How to look credible on camera, how to stop fidgeting. I knew all of those tasks. I knew how to do it just from helping my own self succeed. And then when I was in my late 30s, I decided to start working with a therapist. And she suggested that I get professionally diagnosed and assessed, and then subsequently got a diagnosis of autism and ADHD as an adult. And I would say it's a validation. I don't necessarily use it as a label. I do let people know. The one thing I do is I work with a lot of neurodivergent and disabled people who are business owners and entrepreneurs now. And I think it helps them know that these little things that they've had to apologize for or excuse themselves for are completely accepted and completely allowed to exist and allowed to be used as superpowers for how they build their business. When it comes to mental health, though, and we've been talking about this, is that, the obstruction of allowing people to be who they are, the obstruction or the discouragement that these behaviors that might not seem normal or typical are not allowed to exist in society when they perfectly are, or when we can make accessibility options possible for people to exist in the world. It's really easy to do. For example, I love Zoom meetings and I love this kind of type because what you can't see is that my leg right now is moving constantly on a moving chair. No one would know that I'm doing that. I often have things that I fidget with around my desk, so that allows me to be really focused on the conversation. It allows me to hear my clients. It allows me to think about my thoughts, because I am knowing that I stim and knowing that I have these behaviors, and they don't necessarily have to be changed. We just look for accessibility options. I just talked a lot.
No, that was great. I love that you're, despite all of these supposed challenges, you've managed to do so well. And in a way, not a lot of kids have the opportunity to start their own business in fifth grade or have their own entrepreneurship at such a young age. But so tell me a little bit about, like you did mention the autism and the ADHD, and both of those for some parents can seem like debilitating disorders, and they feel mortified when their child gets that diagnosis. And here in the United States, at least, the special education can sometimes be limiting as far as making the children feel like they don't have all the options and possibilities. So what I'm hearing is you're in Canada. So is special education different in Canada than it is in the United States?
No, I would say we're not perfect, and each province within Canada has their own level of support for children with autism, and it's a challenge. It's really a challenge because even how much is subsidized by government versus what individual families have to pay. And of course, we know that autism is not one series. It is I hate using the word spectrum, but it's not. It's so many different behaviors. It's so many different options that can be under autism. So I'm not typical of somebody else. Like, you can't look at me and go, oh, that's what autism looks like, because it isn't. And the things that I experience in my autism could be very different. I am obviously verbal. There's nonverbal autism. There's, so there's all these different kind of sets. And that's what makes the challenge with it, is because there isn't a standard system of care or a standard system of accessibility, that we do have to do so much customization, and it's on a child per child basis.
So can you share a little bit, like for some people that don't really know, because a lot of people do feel that the children that are diagnosed with autism are mostly stemming or spinning or nonverbal. Can you give us a little bit, because for a lot of disorders, there really is a spectrum. Not everybody falls on the higher end. There's high functioning autistic individuals as well.
There's even higher end. We don't even say high functioning or any of that, because it's not an accurate basis of where people are. When we say things like higher end or higher functioning, it still is aligning with a series of neurotypical behaviors that we assign as being normal or being functioning, when you can actually be absolutely functioning. You can you are functioning even if you're nonverbal, or even if you require aids to help you speak or hear. All of that is about being a functioning person. And I think right there is one of the biggest challenges we have, is because there is still this expectation of certain behaviors as being classed as functioning, when you might not have any of those and still be actual functioning.
Thank you for that clarification. You're right. There are a lot of different options. Like when I used to work in the schools as a school psychologist, I would diagnose people even with learning disabilities. And a lot of them felt like, well, now that I have this learning disability, I'm not going to be able to have a successful career. I'm not going to be able to have the ability to function and support myself. But then we would talk about all of these famous people that have learning disabilities like Whoopi Goldberg or Tom Cruise or Charles Schwab. And so Einstein had a learning disability. And so for us to normalize that makes a huge difference. Can you, and that's what we're trying to do with your diagnosis of autism, or even just autism and ADD or ADHD or any disorder. We need to talk about it. We need to normalize it, and we need to help people understand more. So can you shed some light about some more details about just your struggles, personal struggles with autism, or if you know other people that struggle with autism? And then how did the ADHD impact you as well? Because I can totally relate to like the leg shaking and you're trying to still focus. So share some more about the struggles that you've had to deal with. And then what steps have you taken to overcome or work around and compensate for those issues?
Yeah, I think actually a really good example of where I came face to face with what was expected of me and what I was not, when I was my last corporate job. And it was unfortunate because I was working on a project with someone and it required me to have a lot of focus. So I didn't know I had ADHD at the time, and I knew how I needed to focus. And my job had already been amazing at helping me set up a workspace away from like we're in cubicles, but they actually found me a space where I could focus and it was quiet and nobody interrupted me. And it was amazing that they did that. And it's definitely not the norm in many corporate businesses, but I was so lucky to have that. But then someone started working on the team, and it was a struggle for her to understand why I might not be able to turn around if she was talking to me. And it was because I knew that if I turned around at that moment, if I stopped focusing on what I was doing, I wouldn't come back to it for the rest of that day. I wouldn't come back to it until the next day. And for her, she wanted to have a 5 or 10 minute check-in. And for me, that would have caused 2 days of being behind on the project. And it became to a point where it was abusive. I was crying. Like it got to the point where I had so much trauma and such a fierce reaction to her even coming near me that I couldn't do my job properly. And I think it was hard for her because she had known me for a really long time, even though she had just started working there. And she didn't understand. She would say things like, "You shouldn't cry at work. You're so unprofessional." And I'm like, I can still work through my tears. And this is something that like, I was, because I was reacting and I couldn't control my emotions and I had no ability, but I was still functioning. And she's like, "Well, you're crying. I can't talk to you when you're crying." I'm like, that's a you problem. I can absolutely address what you're saying, and I can have tears going down my eyes, and we can still move on and have this conversation. If it's important to you enough right now to have this conversation, we will have it, but this is what's going to happen because this is how I'm processing right now. And it needs to, you either have to like do this or we don't do this at all. I think it was a weird reaction because it's not typical when somebody's crying, like whatever, but I was fully functioning. Again, it was the knowledge that I, at that moment, could not process the emotions that I was feeling and not be able to communicate properly with her about what I was feeling and the impact of her words and her actions towards me. And it didn't allow me to do that. And the workplace wasn't set up to do it. We had HR involved and they were like, "We don't understand what the issue is." And I'm like, "I don't either, but it's not working." And we knew it wasn't working. And so, I mean, good things and bad things, I ended up leaving my corporate job and starting my career or moving into my business full time. So I guess out of strife, there's usually something good coming out of it. But I think it was a prime example of where I was trying to fit into a very neurotypical world, and the neurotypical world did not have the full supports or structures to help me be successful. Not only me be successful, but my teammates be successful. And I think that's something we have to really work on as we move forward. And it starts with kids in school. I mean, I spent a lot of my time in elementary in the library, which was amazing. We had an amazing library, but I really lost out on a lot of the social connections and friendships that might have happened if I was in the classroom or at recess or able to, interact as myself with all the knowledge that how I interacted with others was normal. It was normal for me. And I think this is something that we, do need to look at, and we need to accept that the way someone reacts to a situation, whether it's from trauma, whether it's from a neurodivergence, is that it's not necessarily wrong. We shouldn't necessarily shame people, but we should actually seek to understand where that's coming from and what's prompting it or what's fueling it.
The accommodation is definitely important in the workplace as well as the school. And you did mention about being socially awkward, and socialization is definitely a component of the autism spectrum disorder. And so can you talk a little bit about how that socialization impaired you just growing up, like you said, spending a lot of time in the library, but how in other ways, I'm sure it affected you as well. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I became really shy and I became really withdrawn. And even as a teen, I was not a happy person. And I wasn't a happy person for most of my adult life. I realize now that going back, I was really going through a lot of emotions. I had a lot of depression. I had bouts of suicide. And I want to say, like we talked about, like my success is not a typical statistic. And I hate talking about my autism and success, because it is only by the privileges and the networks and support networks that I have been access to, but it is not typical. There are a lot of autistic women who are homeless, who have severe mental health issues, who suicide is at alarming rates for women with autism. And so it is women, men, and non-binary. It is definitely something that we need to look at, and we need to look at, I mean, the causes of it are varied, just as with each person, it has a different reaction. But the idea that we know that it's existing, that we know that these can cause like the rejection from what we think is normal in society, can cause and be a catalyst for mental health issues and for seclusion and for, suicidal ideation, is definitely real.
Did you go to therapy did you work with a therapist and deal with those emotions in a mental health setting, or were you just kind of getting through it by yourself?
No, and actually, for the first 10 years of my life where I was working for other corporations, I didn't have the financial means to access mental health support. In Canada, it is not a given, it's not a guarantee, and it can come at really quite a high cost, especially for low-income people. And it was something that I didn't even consider until I actually worked for myself and I had the income coming in. I didn't have benefits from most of my 20s. And when things happened and I didn't have the supports to process it or to manage what I was doing, it became a lot. It became very overwhelming. And I definitely had moments of suicidal ideation. I've called the suicide helpline, and which I think is not set up also for neurodivergent folks. And so that's a challenge. But I definitely was there, and I will be very open about it. And if anyone asks, because I think it was a turning point, that I knew that I couldn't rely on my employers. I couldn't rely on necessary society at large to take care of myself, that I really did need to look and find the means that I could afford help, that I could afford the mental health support. And that is not available for everybody. It really is not. And it should be. North America needs to really step into that.
I'm really surprised, because we're under the impression in the United States that Canada has socialized medicine and that it's everybody has access to it. But when it comes to mental health, not so much.
No, we're really behind the curve. And I mean, yes, I can go into a doctor's office and not have to pay for that individual bill. But unless you have a benefits program that actually covers it, private therapy, you can get on waiting lists, but sometimes those waiting lists can be up to multiple years where you even see a therapist. So can you imagine if you're going through mental health struggles and you have to wait months, years? It's a long time, and it's sad, and it's definitely a greater symptom of Canada's healthcare. We're not perfect. I know a lot of people think that we've got this access to care whenever we want, but we don't.
That's really surprising to hear, and it's true. People around the world contact me from mostly the Asian countries or African countries that they don't have access to mental health care. But in wealthy countries like Canada, the United States, or even anywhere in Europe, that shouldn't be the issue, right? But yet it is, and so a lot of people don't have access, or the access that they need to mental health that they should have. So is that the reason that Were you diagnosed as a child, or was that the reason that it took you so long to get diagnosed, because you didn't have access to mental health?
Yeah, so I actually did undergo testing. I didn't know. I thought it was like, I think they told me at the time in grade 2 when I switched school systems that it was like what do you call it? Like to see what my IQ was, or to see what my proficiency was. No, it was something actually I pursued myself, definitely to get the actual diagnosis as an adult. It wasn't on my medical records. Again, it was something that was done through the school system when I was a child. So none of that was available, made access to me, and my parents didn't really pursue it. And I get it. I really understand. Like, my parents just wanted me to fit in, and they knew that I was a little weird and that there was a little something extra about me. But they did. They wanted me to fit in, and they wanted me to have success. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of personalized or customized schools out there that allowed maybe students that needed different access to needs a full range of opportunities. So I stayed in the public school system the entire way, and then went to college. And then I didn't actually get diagnosed until I was about 39. So I'm 42 now. So this is still a very new thing for me. I'm still learning a lot about it. But it has, I wouldn't say the label has changed me, but it definitely has given me validation. When they started going through some of the behaviors that I exhibit, that I was like, yeah, that's normal. And they're like, yeah, that's normal. It's fine. It's, and so it was a really great process where they're like, no, that's okay. This is okay. And then they started giving me access to how I can actually function in the world better. Not start functioning, but like function in the world better. So like I said, it's interesting. Things that I would started to do naturally anyways and have built into my life, I had better tools, access to better tools, how I could do it even better. One of the things I didn't really realize is that, so part of it is I really focus really well with like an oral stimulation. So when I was a child, my dad used to always have these like big buckets of Scottish mints, and I would take so many Scottish mints to school, and I would pile them all into my mouth. And I didn't know why that helped, but it was able to focus in school. And now learning now that that's actually how I do focus. And it's something that I now have to unlearn, because I predominantly used food as a method of satisfying that or keeping focus. And now I don't want to do that. I don't want to use food as a supplement for it. But now I know that there's tools. There's adult, they're like soothers, like the chewy toys that kids have, only they're adult and they're larger, and you can stick them in your mouth and move them around and play with them while you're focusing on something else. And it allows you just to do things even better.
I would love to talk more about the tools in a little bit, but before that, I know this is probably a huge question, and you answer whatever you feel comfortable with, but as somebody that is struggling with the autism as well as the ADHD, I know that you're not neurotypical, like you said, but can you share some of the symptoms that you noticed that made you question, saying, maybe there's more to this and I need to have answers? And why were they frustrating enough that you, or what frustrations did they cause for you that made you go and look into them?
Yeah, when I left my corporate job, there was definitely some ideas there where I thought, I'm like, why do I always cry? Like, why do I always cry very easily? Why do I have a hard time regulating my emotions? Why, when I try to focus, I get easily distracted? Why do I have 8,000 ideas, but it's really hard for me to put them in motion? Why am I exhausted all the time? Why do I can't go to bed at a normal time? Why do I have to stay up really late? There's so many of them. And, until you actually start to go through kind of this like checklist, some things that you think are, you just sort of accepted, you start to realize that what they are actually a symptom of. And there's so many in my particular diagnosis now that I look at it. But part of it too is just building relationships. So one thing that I am sensitive to is touch, in that I don't like to be touched. It actually can feel like 10,000 needles if someone touches me, and I am married. So that can be, and he loves touch. That's his love language. And so, part of it was that we had been married for about 8 or 9 years at that point. And it was one thing that I just didn't want to keep going. I wanted to know why I reacted certain ways, like it's a very visceral reaction when I'm being touched, but I wanted to be able to show love. And so I started working with a therapist, and she led me to getting diagnosed. But one of the things that we work through is that how can I still help my husband feel loved and have that touch while processing my own needs and how it reacts, but also how I can communicate to him when I just can't be touched, because it's not always, and it's something that I work on and that I practice on, but there's exercises that I do, and it helps train my mind, but it also helps train my body to how I react. And those are things that without that support, without that diagnosis, I wouldn't have had access to. I might have just felt like I'm not lovable, and my husband might have felt like his touch, like, can you imagine the reaction of your loved one not wanting you to touch them? Like, that is such a core relationship, is to touch and hug, and to not have that, or not understand why somebody might jolt and pull away. That can be really traumatic. And so being able to communicate that and to be able to let him know when it doesn't work. And we're still getting there. I mean, we've been married almost 12 years. And it's amazing how he helps me too. Like, he will say, like, I'm about to make really loud noises, or I have also a really strong smell that is part of it. I can't smell things like cooking ground beef. So I have to like leave the house or go downstairs. So these are things but if you don't have that like if you don't have that ability to communicate those needs, and if you don't have that ability to kind of say, this is perfectly normal for me, but I know that it's not perfectly normal for you, how do we create processes and communications with each other to allow us both to have a good life? That's probably one of the best lessons that we've had to learn over the last few years of being together, in that these things aren't necessarily going to go away. I'm not going to be able to change who I am, but we do want to love each other, and we want to have a healthy relationship. That's part of good mental health as well, for him and for me. And so how do we work together to identify that, and what are the supports that I need from him, and what are the supports that he needs from me, and how do we meet that in the middle?
I think you brought up a really good point, the importance of communication. And this is what causes a lot of nonverbal children that struggle with autism to be very frustrated and have behavior issues, because they get frustrated. They can't communicate that frustration with their family members. And that's very frustrating for parents as well. So those are some of the difficulties that parents with children with autism or even ADHD can struggle with, right?
Yeah. And I think one thing that's really important is that we don't always have to fix things. So a really interesting woman, I can't remember her name now, but she's on TikTok, and I love her because she's nonverbal, but she communicates with a device that allows her to type in and it voices for her. And one of the things that she said that really hit home for me was that she doesn't have, like, people say, well, can't you learn how to talk or something like that? She's like, I don't need to learn how to talk. This is how I talk. I already have learned how to talk, and it's using this, and this is my voice. And I think that's like one of the lessons that we can kind of bring into the world, is that we don't have to necessarily, we can accommodate and we can make things accessible, but changing them to be our version of what neurotypical isn't always the best solution.
That's really good for parents that do have children that they're struggling, to know that it's not necessarily their job to fix the child. It's how do you work with the disability? How do you work with the disorder? And then help them figure out how to manage and maneuver through the world with it.
Can I just say something about that? Like, I think it is part of, like, I mean, for parents with children, it's really seeking to listen first. And I think sometimes with kids, we as adults, we think we know what they should want, or we think we know what the best thing is for them, but really they do have an amazing capacity to define what they need and the supports that they need. Again, I was really lucky that I was different, but I had a principal who believed in me, and I'll probably start crying, but like, I had a principal who believed in me, and he encouraged me to be different. But not everybody has that. This is a thing, as I prepped everybody, that sometimes you have to talk through the tears. And I did have parents that, even though they didn't necessarily want to seek out additional support, they were always very encouraging of me to speak how I felt and how I was interacting with it. My mother also taught me really early along not to apologize for myself, and not to just really go after what I felt was true for me. And I think that is something that we don't do enough for kids, is that we are so busy trying to just get through our day and get them through all the activities and get them through their school and get them through all that. And I've seen, even with the lockdown, some amazing things. I have friends with kids with autism, and they've been able to have such an amazing, resilient time over the past year because now they can fidget. Now they can move around in their seat. Now they can play with toys in their hands, and they can be so focused. I've had some friends whose kids were at, like a D and C level, and now they're at an A level because they are allowed to do whatever they want. But again, they're on that Zoom call. You can't see the fidgeting. You can't see all the things that we do. And I've been able to help them. I'm like, here's what I use. Here's some of the tools that I use to hold in my hand and I move around that are silent or that nobody can see. And I've shown some videos for some friends' kids where I'm like, they're like, I can't believe you're moving your leg right now. I'm like, I'm moving it so fast. It's so amazing. It feels so good. And then like, I'll do a video where I'm like, where they can see the bottom half and the top half. And they're just like, wow. I'm like, yeah, you can do this too. You just get a standing desk and then you just have a chair underneath it. And, like it's that kind of stuff where we totally accept what they need in order for them to communicate best. And it's knowing that we sometimes just have to take a step back and listen to what their actual needs are.
I think that rule applies to all kids, and we need to really focus on allowing them to have the freedom to move around. That's why I love about some of the new alternative classrooms where kids do have their wiggle seat. They can sit on a bouncy ball. They can have their fidget toys. So speaking of all the gadgets, because I know there are a lot of wonderful tools and gadgets that kids can use and adults can use. So let's talk about that right now, about what are some things that have been helpful for you and what are some recommendations you can make?
I wish I had it was upstairs, but whoever recommended me the adult chew toys is amazing, but they're for kids too. And they're just the silicone based. They come in a variety of shapes. The ones I have are like a long cylindrical because I can just put it in my mouth and I can move it around. I also have a ball that I can move around so if I need to have my hands free. You of course want to make sure there's no choking hazards, but I mean, there are tools that are completely geared for that. If they need anything to do with their mouth moving, there's definitely like fidget. One of the things that I have a problem with a lot of the fidget spinners is they make noise. And so if you are in a classroom or a situation where there's other people around you, you want to make sure that your fidgeting, that your stimming isn't necessarily distracting them. And so there's silent tools that can go. One thing that I work that it's not a tool that you can buy, but it works really well is just actually a stretchy piece of fabric or a pair of nylons. And it's something that I can stretch and pull back and forth, and it's silent and it's really unobstructive and people can't see it necessarily, especially if you're on Zoom. But even if you're in a classroom, you can just sort of pull it in with your desk and you can play with it and move it backwards, and it doesn't distract other people. And that's the challenge when we're in situations where it's a workplace or a classroom, is that while we need to have accessibility for our diverse needs, we also need to recognize that that can be distracting for other people. So it's creating that kind of balance and having that conversation with other parents and with the teacher and other kids in the class, I think is one of the best things that you can do. So it's like, what works? What works for everybody, so that the kid doesn't have to go to the library like I did as a child. I spent a lot of time in there, but I would have loved to have been able to have some of these tools so that I could have stayed in the classroom and been with, other people my age.
They do make a big difference. And I know for the occupational therapists and the schools that I worked with had some really great tools for the kids. The chew toys was very popular. But even I went to graduate school with a student that she had a severe ADHD, and this is the days of the Palm Pilot, and she would sit next to me and look like she was distracted the entire time playing on her Palm Pilot. And then as soon as the teacher would call on her, she would just spill out the answer exactly as was needed. And it took me a while to understand that that's how she focuses. That's how she pays attention, and she shouldn't be punished for that. Have you experienced that too?
Yes, I doodle a lot, and I've doodled since I was a kid and even in my adult corporate career. And I know it can look like I'm not paying attention. And the doodles I do are like squiggle drawings. It starts with one squiggle and then you build on that squiggle and you shade it in and you shade it and it gets bigger. And it could fill all of my pages in my notebook, or it can be on the sides where I'm taking notes, or it can be a whole page. I did that as a kid. And again, I didn't know that that's what I needed to do, but I was able to recall exactly everything that was said completely. Like I could repeat verbatim back what a teacher would say. And again, I was really lucky. I had teachers who saw me and saw my potential and were able to kind of say, is this what you're doing to concentrate? And I would say, yes. Otherwise, I would actually fall asleep in class. I would just sort of zone out, or you space out. You kind of just like go, I can't really describe it. You just basically like are not in the classroom anymore. I still actually would retain what was happening, but it can be very disconcerting for people to sort of see someone where all of a sudden their eyes are drifting off to the side and they're not responsive in their body. And so what I would do is I would do the doodling, but I got a lot of feedback and about people where they say, can you just pay attention? Like, or how come you're not paying attention in this meeting? And it was like, this is how I am paying attention. And then I would have to use proof. I would have to show how I could repeat everything that was said back in that conversation, absolutely verbatim. I got used to doing that. It's not great, but sometimes it was a good reminder too for people what was said. So it was also helpful for my coworkers and my classmates when I sometimes repeated really important things that maybe they missed. So it wasn't always all bad, but definitely I'm a doodler. I love anything to do with, like, again, my hand is moving, then I can focus. But it was interesting too. One of the things I worked as a media relations practitioner for several years. And one of the things that I would always recommend people who are nervous on camera is I would say, just grab a pen, make sure it's not a clicky pen because you'll click it, but a solid pen. And I said, just hold it in your hand and you come back and you hold it in your hand, you hold it in your hand, you come back to it all the time like this. And it's just a way that you can actually present your, like, come back to your thoughts, collect yourself, do that. And what I didn't realize is that's just a tactic I do to stop the stimming that can happen. And I mean, I try and do all these practices, and I'm still learning as well, because of course it changes depending on your environment, depending on what you ate, depending on how much you slept. Your needs are going to change and it's going to vary, but it's knowing that those things are possible and to find out how to actually, like, keep asking the questions, like, how can I make this even better? How can I bring more ease into my life in order to allow myself to still get the things done that I need to get done?
Those are some good tips. I like the use of the pen. That does help you focus and kind of make you feel grounded, and especially for people that have anxiety as well. It kind of brings you back to your body, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
So I know with a lot of disorders and just in life in general, and especially now during the lockdown, structure is very, very important, and routine is really important for all of us. But how important has it been for you in helping you manage your symptoms and regaining control?
Yeah. Did you hear it? I just had like a big sigh because it was like, it's something I'm still really working on. But, you know, one thing I found is that I did stay up way too late, and I still do on occasion. I was up way too late last night, and sometimes it's anxiety focused. Sometimes it's just I'm wide awake with so many ideas. But what I found was then that I was really tired the next day. I still would wake up the same time as if I had gone to bed, 3 hours earlier, 4 hours earlier. So I was really tired. And what happens is when I'm tired, I mean, I talk about, I can't smell cooking ground beef in the kitchen. Anything. I'm always like, I'll say to myself, do you smell that? Or do you hear that? I mean, I can hear every electronic device in our house at any given time on a good day. On a day where I haven't eaten well or I haven't slept well, it's overwhelming. And it's very hard for me to interact with my environment when I have at any given time this screaming in my ears where I can hear the fridge moving. And it can be very disconcerting. And so what I have actually been doing in especially the last 3 to 4 weeks, is I'm trying to go to bed early. I'm trying to say, okay, 9:30, 10, like that's it. I'm going to bed and I'm winding myself down. And what it has done is, it's just allowed me to be more rested, to allow myself to be in tune with my body a lot more, to know what's happening, to hear what's happening within myself. It's allowed me to be able to be a nicer person to the people in my life, and allow me to not be so subjected to a lot of stimulus. And it's not going to be perfect. The quality of sleep is definitely something that is also needed. But I am starting to get more into like how food affects me, how things I eat affect me, and how the symptoms or behaviors are more amplified depending on what I eat, how I eat, when I eat. All of those things are definitely things that I'm focusing on right now, because I want to be my best self. I want to be just like anyone else. I want to feel really good. I want to wake up every day ready to take on, even though I know that it's not always going to go as I plan, but I want to start off with that intention. And that a part of that is taking care of my body and really being in tune with what it needs to function. movement is going to be a big thing for because I spent the last year being a potato, which I'm sure a lot of people are kind of thinking that's what happened too. We didn't have all of our gyms closed. Even walking trails had been restricted. There were so many things going on with the pandemic here that it was hard. It was easier just to stay in your house. And I am a marriage commissioner also, so I marry people. And so what I wanted to do is stay very, very isolated so that I could reduce my risk of getting COVID and impacting somebody's wedding day. And so part of that was really isolating myself and keeping myself inside, which limited my ability to move. And I definitely saw an increase in the behaviors I do not want to have increased. And I definitely saw my own ability to function and focus decline.
Yeah, definitely. But the limitations that are set. What part of Canada are you from? Do you guys have a lot of snow right now?
We just got some snow this week, but we've actually been very lucky. It's been very warm. I'm in Alberta, Canada, so we're right above Montana in the U.S. And I'm in Edmonton, so I'm in northern. But we've actually had a really nice winter. There's that realization, and that's something too. Is vitamin D has actually been an amazing part of my daily, taking care of myself routine. And if I don't, my husband now is like, have you had your vitamin D? Like, he can tell, like, it affects my well-being and affects my mental health. I'll just be less energetic. I will not feel like doing any of my projects. And he's like, how much vitamin D have you had today? I'm like, none, because I forget about things. That's another thing. It's hard. I forget to eat. I forget to drink water. I forget to take vitamins. These are all part and parcel of me being me. And yeah, if I do forget, it definitely has an impact. Vitamin D deserves way more research. It deserves way more investigation because it's amazing.
Well, it's also playing a big role in whether people get COVID and then how severe the COVID symptoms are. If they have enough vitamin D in their system and their vitamin D levels are normal, it tends to make the symptoms minimal, or they might not catch it at all. So it plays a huge role in a lot of areas of our lives. And you're right, it deserves a lot of attention and a lot of credit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in 2019, in the winter of 2019, before we really launched into our COVID fun, I was really depressed, I probably one of the deepest, darkest depressions I've ever had. And I just couldn't figure out what was going on, and nothing seemed to be working. And then, a friend was like, how's your vitamin D? I was like, I don't know why. It's in my multivitamin. She's like, just up it. She's like, it can't hurt. And I was like, yeah, I guess, whatever. And I started taking a large amount of it, and it was amazing. It was about 3 to 4 days. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, there's sunshine. There's light here. And so I started bringing more, and I haven't stopped. Like, it's just something that I will never not stop taking now, especially knowing that I'm so far north and that I'm inside. Like, 2020, if you're inside all the time, that even limits your, more. We have winter 7-8 months of the year. We're not exactly out there with our bare arms trying to get vitamin D. So it is definitely something that I fully 100% recommend.
Well, for women, at least, it requires 20% of your body exposed to sun. And a lot of us aren't walking around in a bikini all day long for 20 minutes. So, but I do recommend that people get a blood test to see how low their vitamin D is and then supplement accordingly, because although a lot of us are deficient in vitamin D, it's also good to know what your levels are and then not overdo it, because with everything, there's moderation, right? Yeah. You have to figure out, and working with a doctor would be the best thing. And then, there's foods that you can take or eat that can increase your vitamin D, but supplementing is definitely, it seems like it's something that we all have to consider at one point in our lives.
Yeah. One of the things that when I was talking to my doctor about it and my results with it is he was saying too, that a lot of vegetables that might have vitamin D in it can also, if you eat a lot of those vegetables, like you said, it can also impact your thyroid. So there's always this balance. He says, whereas you could take vitamin D as a supplement and then not have to necessarily worry about the imbalance that other vitamins and enzymes that are in those vegetables might affect on your body. I'm like, oh my gosh. When you start to think about all those different levels and how it can impact how you feel and how you're going about your day, it can be overwhelming.
It can be. This is why it's really important to seek medical advice whenever you can, and educate yourself as much as you can, and then making yourself a priority so that you can be mentally and physically healthy and balanced. It's really important. So tell us a little bit about this podcast that you have, and then where people can find you if they want to have questions or if they want to reach out to you in any way.
Sure. I'm about to launch the little podcast of Big Questions, and it actually came from a product that I made 2 years ago called the Little Box of Big Questions. And that started with I'm a coach. And so people love the questions that I ask them. And they said, oh, I wish that I could have you in my pocket. And I was like, I can make that. I can do that. So I made a box of powerful little questions. It comes in a little box that's, about 2.5 inches wide by 2.5 inches wide. And it is 50 powerful questions. So what happened though, when I made that, is I thought I was making it for entrepreneurs and small business owners. And then as a result, I started talking to people who had bought it, including parents who are using it with their kids to help them create really just powerful intention through their actions. I had one woman whose son actually punched somebody at school. And so she had him pull a card while she was processing her own thoughts about it. And the card he pulled was, how does this impact people outside of myself? And he's like, well, I guess my friends are going to miss me because I'm suspended. And she's like, no, let's go through this. And so they went through how it affects her and how it affects his little brother and how it impacts the child that he punched and his parents and the kids that had to watch it and the teacher that had to break up the fight and the principal who was he was actually working with a group of kids to help them read. They were just struggling a little bit with reading in class. And so the principal was holding an additional reading. He had to leave that. And then those kids didn't get their extra reading time. And so she just saw how was one action had a ripple effect out. And I was like, wow, that's really impactful. I didn't realize that you would do that. And then I started talking to a mediator who uses it for people who are suing each other or angry at each other or breaking up a relationship. And she uses those questions for people to help find a common ground with each other and to see different perspectives. And a corporate person was saying that they start all of their brainstorming sessions with these questions now. And I was like, oh, I had no idea. And I wanted to hear how people interact with questions. I wanted to hear how those questions were different with different experiences, different learned experiences, different biases. And so what I started doing is I started this podcast. I've actually just finished recording the 64th interview. So I didn't know it was going to be so popular in like 3 weeks. So I'm a little bit behind, but it should be launched in the next week or so. And the idea is that on my website, createtherules.com, is that there is a section for the podcast. Each one of the 50 powerful questions will have its own page. And as we go from now until 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I want to fill up each one of those pages with different experiences and different ways that people interact with the questions. So to start, somebody goes and they pick the question that most resonates with them. And then they come on and we talk about how that question has impacted them in their life or why it's significant to them or why it drew them to them. And then halfway through the podcast, I actually pick a new question from them, completely random from the little box of big questions. And then we respond and we go through it and we talk about it. And it has been such an amazing experience. Again, just seeing so many different perspectives, faiths, religious backgrounds, belief systems, experiences, different neurodivergent, neurotypicals, the way they come at these questions. And I guess my ultimate agenda with this is to help people really see that we are just all people on this big old rock hurtling through space. That sometimes when we're interacting with people on the other side of a keyboard, we forget that there's that they're actually whole people having separate lives, vibrant lives without us, and that they have experiences, and not everyone is experiencing the same thing. And my hope is that we can not only encourage better questions to be asked, but also to create safe spaces for people to answer those questions and to really go into why we do the things we do, and is it working for us, and how does it impact those around us, and how does it actually create just a better world for everyone.
Wow, that's so exciting. I can't wait to learn more about your podcast when it launches. Are you on social media or your website you did mention? Can you mention your website again, and then any social media?
Yeah, you can find me at my website is www.createtherules.com. And I'm on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all as createtherules.com. If you're a TikTok fan, I'm on there asking questions every day, pulling some of the questions from the little box of big questions and going through how we can use questions to make our life even better.
Well, that's so exciting. Thank you so much for sharing all that. And thank you for being here and making the time to answer my questions and shedding some light on autism and ADHD and then also just learning to accept people for who they are, regardless of what they're struggling with. Like you said, there are people having their own lives, their own struggles, and we just need to be more compassionate and more understanding.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I love what you're doing in the world. I love these conversations. I spent all weekend actually listening to all of them. I'm like, I want to listen to every single one of them. And the people that you have on here are really bringing good conversations to the world and allowing some really great perspectives. And I love what you're doing. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.